Hey friends, thanks for joining me, Jim Baroud, to hear a few insights from leaders who represent our innovation ecosystem. Today's chat is with Bruce Eckfeldt, a consultant, coach, author, and speaker on organizational development and performance management, and Sam Delgado, Vice Chair of the New Jersey Cannabis Regulatory Commission and a retired Verizon executive. Bruce, why don't we start with you? Go ahead. Tell us about
Sure.
it.
Thanks, Jim. So a backstory. Originally I was an architect. I got into software. I founded a tech company back in 2002. So I became a founder, a CEO, been through that whole kind of process of growing a company, scaling a company, selling a company, and all the trials and tribulations that come with it. For the last 6-7 years, I've been focused on advising, coaching companies on strategy and building out leadership teams. Picked up a couple of cannabis clients about 5 years ago and have been pretty active in the space. Because of that, started a podcast called Thinking Outside the Bud. And we've done probably about, I think, 300 some odd episodes now, speaking with cannabis leaders around the business of cannabis, the regulatory frameworks, legal side, medical side, and have built out a pretty interesting network and have had some amazing conversations with amazing folks and have learned a little bit about cannabis over the last 5-6 years. So that's kind of what I do and how I relate to the industry.
Great. Thanks, Bruce. Sam Delgado, go ahead.
I'm a retired Verizon executive. I spent 21 years with the company in various roles. The last 13 years, I was vice president of external affairs here for the state of New Jersey. I manage county and municipal government relations. I also managed the Verizon New Jersey Foundation during that time. Prior to that, I spent 20 years in the Marine Corps, retired as a major. Was a combat communications officer, had various roles. I worked down during Desert Storm, operated during Desert Storm. I was down in Haiti during '94, the government transition in 1994, and which served me well because later on, as a Verizon executive, I was asked to come down to Haiti and work with Doctors Without Borders and coordinate some NGO activities down there. That was back in 2010 during the big earthquake down there where 200,000 people were actually killed down in Port-au-Prince. So that's my background. Again, I retired in 2019 and bought this old house, renovated it, and I got called and asked if I wanted to serve on the Cannabis Regulatory Commission, and here I am today.
And thank you, Sam. And tell us about the commission. Explain for folks who aren't aware of how that functions and how it was stood up.
Well, the commission is a 5-member board. We are supported by a staff. Jeff Brown is the executive director. Diana Wainu is our chairperson, and we're responsible for regulating cannabis. Very simple. We're responsible for regulating cannabis in the state of New Jersey, which means that we take the law that the legislature passed, and we make the regulations for that law. So basically, very simple. I just want to keep it simple.
Great. Okay. Well,
simple but not easy.
Exactly. Thank you.
Precisely. That's why we want to have this conversation to inform, educate, and clarify what's going on. So let's dive right into it. Obviously, things are going on in the state as well as the region and the country, right? So let's talk about what's going on in the state. And let me hand it over to Bruce as from a outside sort of, tell us how you see things progressing. And then Sam, you could give us a little more details on.
So what's happening in kind of East Coast, particularly New Jersey, relative to the overall cannabis market? The things that I've noticed, one is, we've had a series of states over the last 4, 5, 6 years that have implemented various programs. They've tried various strategies. Some of them have worked, some of them have not. And so we're in this interesting kind of period where we have some case studies, we have some examples. I mean, I always say cannabis is like one of the perfect examples of, I think, one of the sort of the founders founders of the country's kind of ideas of creating this kind of state level, federal level differentiation, and the states become these kind of experimental areas where you can try things and then it gets resolved and eventually we figure it out. Well, we've had a lot of experiments, right? So states have been doing various things, various strategies, various kind of techniques. We're now at a point where we're bringing in some of these new states. So one big thrust I find is, what have we learned, right? Like, how have we looked at what states have implemented, the nature of those states, the nature of the programs, and kind of either borrowed things that we feel are working or adjusted things that we feel are not working. So I think that's one thread. The other big thread for me is just the fundamental difference of the nature of the economies, the cultures, the situation on the East Coast, some of the very logistics, like how are we set up from a transportation point of view? Like those things are very different than a lot of the states, particularly on the West Coast, that have been doing this. So for me, a lot of the issues or a lot of the what we've been trying to figure out is the confluence of those. Like, how do we learn from previous states? And then how do we adjust these policies to fit how things really kind of work in New York, New Jersey? I mean, everything from, we've got complicated border situations, we've got complicated industries, right? So all those things I think are contributing kind of to the topics and the issues and how we're trying to both figure out the regulatory systems, but also how business, the industry is really trying to work itself out here.
Thank you for that, Bruce. All right, Sam, tell us about, your perspective on how the state is progressing. I know there's something just happened yesterday, but give us sort of the timeline here.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's if you want the timeline, we April 12th was the first day I was on the job. Okay. And that's 8-9 months ago. And in the past 8 months, we've done a lot of work. We've established recreational cannabis rules. We expanded municipal cannabis. We've done some really good public engagement and gotten feedback through our public hearings and webinars. And then yesterday, all right, we began accepting online recreational license applications. So I'm glad you asked that question because we had 145 accounts created yesterday online, all right, and 160 applications completed and submitted. So, with that, and that was like, we opened up at 9 o'clock and we went strong. That was about 20 new users per hour. So that was pretty intense. So we have our work cut out for us. I'll admit that. But overall, New Jersey's recreational industry is off to a pretty solid start with those numbers. And that was the first day, Some of the things that we've done, and I want to let you know, with the public engagements, we've had over 10 public meetings, 600 public comments during those meetings. I think we counted about 1,100 or close to 1,200 live attendees in our statewide webinar with 1,800 views in 1 week. We've engaged a lot of prospective applicants. We've also engaged some partners, colleges, New Jersey cannabis associations, as well as municipal officials. And we also presented, and Jim, you're familiar with this, at the New Jersey, I don't know if Brian is, but the New Jersey League of Municipalities, the conference down in Atlantic City. We did a very good presentation. Diana and Jeff did a great presentation down there. That was the feedback I got. I wasn't there because I had a wedding to attend to, but that was very well attended with a lot of questions asked, and there's still a lot of questions being asked. And we'll continue keeping those, answering those questions. A big highlight was the establishing of the cannabis rules back in August 19th. I think we also expanded. I talked about expanding the municipal cannabis on October 15th. The CRC issued 10 municipal cultivating awards and 4 vertical integrated awards, and that was from our 2019 RFA. I can tell you that going forward, we're going to be opening our Class 5 retail online applications in March 15th to be exact. You can go to our website, the CRC website, and see those dates. We'll be proposing adopting the formal rules for recreational, and also proposing it and updating, all right, which is important because the municipal rules need updating, and we'll be updating those regulations. And finally, we'll continuing processing online applications during this time, and then hopefully opening up like recreational marijuana, recreational cannabis out there for sale.
So that's
a lot of aspirations, Jim.
Thank you for that timeline. That was helpful. Now, when do we expect? For those who aren't aware, medicinal, distributors are out there currently, and then when do we suspect or forecast that recreational outlets, retailers will be on the ground and open?
So I don't have a crystal ball in front of me, and I don't want to. I don't want to be, I don't want to be called on the carpet to say, hey, Sam Delgado said we're going to be opening on April 1st, which is April Fool's Day. But I can tell you it's going to be sometime in 2022. How's that for a non-answer?
That's a great, no, it's all.
Can I ask you a question on that?
Sure, Bruce, go ahead.
I'm curious, Sam. What are the big variables that you see affecting that date? Like, are these internal process things? Are these logistic stuff? Like, what are you looking at as?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of logistic stuff, Bruce. To answer your questions, I mean, obviously you have the existing ATCs out there, the existing players out there. Okay, they're going to have to decide, when they're going to transition. Okay,
Yep.
And that's something that we don't control, right?
Yeah.
So they may decide on January 1st that they want to pay the fee to transition to recreational cannabis, recreational adult use cannabis, or they may not, or they may decide on April 1st. So that's something that we don't control, right? So they're going to be the first. They're going to, because they're already operating. They're going to be the first ones out the box, right?
Yep.
So that's why, I'm hedging. I don't, to answer that, I don't know,
Yeah, because the external factors, I get it.
Yeah. So there's a lot of logistical factors, right?
Yep.
Then there's also, the municipalities, right? If you deal, part of one of the things I see, because I was, I managed the Verizon relationships here in the state, both on a municipal level, 565 municipalities. Jim's very much aware of how many municipalities. It's all about local control here, right? So
Yeah.
now you have to go before a zoning board meeting. And if you ever been before a zoning board meeting, Bruce, Jim's shaking his head. He knows what I'm talking about, right? So it could take months to get approval for a business to set up to open in New Jersey because of zoning board approval, municipal approval. So it's a moving target.
Yeah. Well, and then on top of that, actually, standing up a cannabis operation, cultivating, processing, I mean, getting to the point where you actually have product on shelves that people can pay for takes a little while, right? It's not an instantaneous switch.
Yeah, it's not an instantaneous switch. And also remember, we're really stressing the municipal. We want to make sure, according to the law, the ATCs, the existing players, they have to make sure that they have enough supply on hand to address the municipal issue, to make sure that the folks with the medical licenses, they get service, right? So they can't just, switch over right away.
Yeah.
I'd be curious, Sam, you just mentioned something, that's endemic in our state, all these towns and different laws and rules. Is there one, I mean, this seems to be a perfect opportunity for a municipality or a city to sort of be a beacon of sort of user friendliness, right? In this sector. Is there one city that you see or a municipality that is sort of very progressive and really starting to get their act together and be sort of very user friendly for this sector?
So now you're asking me to name this
that's right.
to promote a municipality so that everybody. I'm not going to do that.
Okay, Sam, I will not ask you. Bruce, do you have any sense for this at all?
I guess I probably don't know enough about really what's happening at the municipal level in Jersey to be able to declare, where it's been fascinating to see in other states, though, how municipalities have approached this, because there's definitely this, hey, I'm worried about it, not in my backyard, right? Like I support it in general, but I don't want to put it here. And then there's been, towns, municipalities that have embraced it and have, really benefited from it, right? Obviously, it comes with some complexities and stuff, but the economic opportunity is very real, and deciding how to embrace that, particularly in areas where you might be a bit of a magnet, right? If I don't have other counties nearby, like I can take advantage of that. And there's a bit of a strategy game, I find, for a lot of these municipalities in making some of these decisions.
Yeah. And
I can't
go ahead.
I'm sorry, Jim. Go ahead.
So Bruce, speak to that a little bit. You've seen things happen across this domino effect across, in other states, right?
Yeah.
Well, I guess New Jersey has the benefit of sort of learning from mistakes of other states. Who has done it? Is there one state, one municipality that has done it really well in your?
I think it's so I can talk about states that are interesting. So Oklahoma is just a fascinating one, right? I mean, they took a very sort of libertarian free market, like anyone get a license, make the licenses cheap, and then it's just Lord of the Flies, right? Like who can survive? We'll let the market kind of sort itself out. And it's interesting because I guess philosophically, I'm very kind of for that idea of, let the market figure itself out, let, competitive forces kind of play, and, that's the best way to kind of supply to meet demand and all this stuff. The fundamental problem, however, it's not an even playing field, right? And whether you're dealing with, access to capital, social equity, the regulatory environment, right? All these things mean that we don't have a pure open playing field to really make that a viable or a process that's going to lead to the best possible outcomes for us as a society, for consumers, for citizens. So the challenge I find is like, what do you put in place? What restrictions do you put in place to try to level the playing field? I think the big markets, if you look at Illinois, right, they had, massive growth. They had, had some problems with their social equity program. California is dealing with, gluts in markets right now because of the supply and demand. I mean, Washington had that a while ago. So I think we're starting to see some levers or some things we can do to prevent things from kind of going off the rails, right? I think that's number one, is we don't want to create markets where you've got such huge swings in supply and demand and pricing where it's just either impossible or horribly painful as a business owner to kind of operate within the market. And then you're going to have churn on these businesses. That doesn't help the industry, doesn't help the local economies. And you also have things of like, okay, well, do we, on the social equity is a huge one. Yes, we can do certain things to create more initial opportunities. We can provide licenses, reduce costs for certain licenses, support licensing, but that's just one part of the program, right? We need capital, we need training, we need access to real estate, right? Like if you look at what it takes to really create a level playing field in a social equity point of view, there's lots of different facets, and we're starting to figure out some of them, but I think we all need to recognize that it's not, like, we haven't solved that one. And honestly, I don't know, we're not going to solve it completely. The question is can we solve it to the point where we've got a reasonable regulatory environment, a reasonable kind of industry and access where we've created reasonable opportunities for folks, right? And it's hard, but that's one of the big things people are grappling with.
Right. Well, what about that as far as funding entrepreneurs and, where is that money coming from? And I know states are helping in somehow, some way. And Sam, give us an update on how the state is sort of supporting that effort to, help get entrepreneurs started.
Yeah. So before I go there, I just want to go back to the municipalities. Just make one comment. All right. I think what you're going to knowing New Jersey and having spent a lot of time and knowing a lot of mayors and city council and zoning boards and having gone to all these meetings, I can tell you this: what you're going to have, all right, is you're going to have two opposite. It's going to be a wide spread, right? You're going to have municipalities that are going to be, they're going to opt out, right? Yep. At this end, right? And they're just not going to have, then you're going to have some in the middle. They're going to let, 2 or 3 operators in town. And then you will have municipalities that will be totally open to the cannabis business in town and willing to bring them in and allow them in. So you're going to have a widespread. Now, getting back to the equity, and by the way, that's good. That's kind of going to affect equity also, right? Because now it's going to cut down and where these businesses can locate, right? So I think to answer your question, that's evolving right now. Okay, obviously we at the CRC we're having a lot of discussions and planning right now with partners. But let me tell you some things that we've done. All right, I think we've put in place and established priority review for targeted groups. All right, and we've established impact zones. There are impact zones, and basically those are municipalities with a high population of unemployed, high number of crime or arrest for cannabis, or combination of all those, right? We focus on market access for diverse entrepreneurs, all right? If you look at our application fees, all right, which are on our website, low application fees, so and also competitive licensing fees. And I think our that fee structure is going to be very, very extreme and very helpful to entrepreneurs. We have protection for our license holders for predatory practices. So we've put in place management service contracts, and those basically are contracts to agree for provide professional staffing and other work. All right, and exchange and for monetary exchange. So we required that those contracts impose reasonable fees. We don't want unreasonable fees out there, interest rates or returns. We receive, these are things that we've put in place. I can go through a lot, but I think these are things that we put in place that we're very cognizant of what equity is about here at the CRC. The other thing I want to say, all right, equity, it's to Bruce's point, okay, it's hard.
Yeah.
But here at the CRC, we recognize that, but we can never stop trying to reach those goals, right? So it's very aspirational for us to establish an equitable market here in New Jersey. Right, we're going to catch a lot of slings. I mean, we're already catching slings and arrows about outrageous.
Oh, yeah, sure.
So, and we're going to catch more, but we're never going to stop trying. All right, and I think that's the message that I, as a commissioner here at the, and I'm looking at the camera here. I, as a commissioner, that's what I want to stress. We're never going to stop, and we're always going to have that discussion. All right, it's not going to be easy. But I look at this as a movie, all right? I think we at the CRC are directors of that movie, and hopefully when we premiere the movie, all the bad stuff's going to be edited on the floor, and we'll have a great movie.
No, that's really encouraging. And we're thankful for your leadership, Sam. Now, Bruce, what about private funders? You've been in the market for a while. Is it mostly banks, or are there other types of funds available to get folks started?
Yeah, well, it's most likely not banks. I mean, most of the banks have not participated in traditional ways in terms of providing funding, either capital, equity, or operating expense financing for these companies, and mainly because of the federal legal situation, right? So they stayed pretty clear of it for the most part. Most of the money is going to be, privately held. It's going to be high net worth individuals that are doing most of it. We're starting to see some institutional money coming into the space. The two big challenges have been sort of the federal illegality of it. It causes some problems for a lot of investors, where it kind of taints their portfolio. So they have to kind of figure out how to cleave it off and things like that. And then also just the general social stigma around it. And that, I think we've seen a pretty dramatic change over the last 5 years, 6 years. And mainly because of, a lot of the efforts we've had around cannabis education and really kind of getting the word out there. Also, I think there's been more kind of understanding of some of the applications and use of cannabis above and beyond just the traditional kind of pot culture thing. I mean, the medical applications are pretty significant. You're starting to get some demographic demographics, age groups that are now willing to kind of experiment with cannabis. So they're starting to soften some of the things. Quite honestly, some of it is going to be generational, right? Like as the industry moves along and the generations move along, like you'll have more just kind of natural adoption of it. But yeah, so I think the biggest thing that's happening right now is this, some of the family offices and some of the institutional money are starting to come into play. A lot of it is still, they kind of slice it up. So I may not want to invest directly in a cannabis company holding a license, but maybe I can finance the real estate, or I can finance the equipment, or I can find some ways to provide financial support that doesn't get me tied to the actual, plant touching entity. Even then, though, we're starting to see some changes around that, and they've been good opportunities, and then people have been doing some fairly creative ways of, creating some walls between some of this stuff to allow for that. But that's evolving. I think the thing that's happening around this is it's starting to become a little bit more competitive, meaning there's more money kind of available. So people, it is, I think, helping. I would call it helping. Other people may disagree, but helping with some of the valuations, meaning you're creating valuations that, from a business point of view, are actually sustainable and something I can deliver on. Because I think a lot of the challenge companies have had, the valuations were just so out of line. They were kind of destined to fail in terms of being able to deliver on those. So then they put themselves, either in, significant sort of balance sheet issues, or just very disillusioned investors, which makes it hard to kind of do follow-on investments and stuff. So it's getting there. It's maturing, but it's still problematic. There's still structural issues with cannabis that make it difficult to invest.
Got it. And I just want to make sure I mention that to ask Sam. Is there anything you suspect in the future where, of course, I think banks will come on board eventually, but is the state, is there any prospect of the state helping with funding in the future, Sam, that you know of?
I can tell you we do have we are negotiating, we are discussing that within the state, and there are partners within the state. I'm not going to discuss the individual discussions that we're having, but yes, the answer is yes.
Great. And I think that segues right into diversity, equity in the space. And you guys mentioned it throughout, but is there anything else, Sam, do you want to touch on as far as, you mentioned some of the things that you're doing already. Is there anything else that we need to know from that perspective?
Yeah, I really want to promote our Office of Minority, Disabled, Veteran, and Women Business Development. Okay, and it's the director there, Wesley McKnight, is he just came on board about a month ago. He's doing a great job. He hit the ground running, and and that office was set up, in the act, in the CREAM Act, in the law to promote and facilitate the diverse cannabis market here in New Jersey. So, part of that is a lot of outreach that he's going to be doing out to the underserved population in the state, providing information. So that's part of it. Communication is important. You don't know how many, I did a webinar back in October, and the first thing I said about the cannabis industry, if you want to get into this industry here in New Jersey, is read the regulations, read the law, understand it. There's so many questions out there that are, I don't know how many times I get asked, when is the CRC, when is the Cannabis Regulatory Commission going to allow homegrown? Well, we don't regulate, it's not in the law, so we can't regulate it. We can't tell. That's up to the legislature, right? Mm-hmm. So these are things that are there. It's on our website. It's in our regulations. So I again, if you're watching this podcast, read the law, read the regulation. It's there. It's very simple. And maybe not that simple because a lot of people don't read it, but it's there. And watch the webinars.
Yeah.
Watch the webinars.
Absolutely. Well, and speak to that, Bruce, a little bit. What you're seeing, you mentioned earlier about other states. Have other states done a really good job in diversity and equity that you can look to, or that we can consider?
Well, so many states have tried. I think the big levers that people have been playing with, which are important levers, they're important, not sufficient necessarily. Obviously, the licensing fees, everything to do with kind of the licensing process, right? Access to the license, being able to kind of get the information they need, actually reading the regulations, things like that. I think what we're realizing, or what has become more and more apparent, it's not just creating like a quota or a number or a percentage that we're going to cleave off in some way. Like, we really need to understand what are the structural things in place that make it difficult to create equity, right? Or that create bias, right? That make it easier for some people to be able to navigate and take advantage of the system, and not as easy for other folks. And so until we really kind of understand kind of those mechanics, it's not going to be perfect, right? So, but as we identify those things, and everything from, access to information, when we do the review meetings, even things like time of day can be a bias for certain people, right? So understanding, like, how can we create opportunities that start to remove those sort of systemic biases in the system. The other thing I think we're starting to see is, I think states and communities that are understanding it's not just about getting licenses awarded and getting people kind of starting businesses, but actually supporting them through the business process. So access to capital, being able to get vendor relationships, building relationships with municipalities, with the communities, right? These are the things that are ultimately going to make these businesses long-term successful. So, it's one thing to get a bunch of license holders and to get a business a year later. It's another thing, 5, 6, 7 years later, does that person still own the license? Are they running a successful business? And I think that's what we're seeing in a lot of these states that had early programs. They may have had some early wins. They got licenses going, but if you look 5 years out, the number of folks that are still holding those licenses, and do we really have that kind of diversity in the established market? I think that's what we're starting to see. And that's why I think we're backing it in with education. We're backing it in with, supporting them in terms of actually operating the businesses, and making sure that we're watching. I think there's been some, quasi-predatory kind of approaches here where companies kind of swoop in and grab these licenses, when things are not as stable or when the businesses aren't doing so well. So I think we're starting to look at, okay, how do we monitor that and make sure that we're unwinding the work that we've done in the initial phase.
I think that's an important point, because, I've supported entrepreneurship for many, many years, and it's just like any business, there's chances of failure, especially with new businesses, right? The chances are like 50%, depending on the statistic. And so maybe, Sam, that's something obviously on your mind, but, I think Bruce mentioned something that could be, maybe you attach a mentor and a coach to every business, with checkups along the way, and obviously education. I'm sure you're on top of that, Sam. Go ahead.
I mean, look, it's the marketplace, right? And the marketplace is always going to dictate where it's going to go. To me, sustainability. I mean, you talk about access to capital. I mean, the question is, once you get that access, what do you do with that capital, right? And how you manage that capital, and how you manage risk with that capital, right? I mean, look, as a 30-year-old, 35 years ago, when I had a lot more hair, all right, I bought a franchise. I bought a printing franchise, Minuteman Press of Newark, all right? And if I knew, and I was a 30-year-old and I thought I knew everything and I was going to, kick ass and be successful, and I failed, all right? If I knew now what I knew then, whatever you want to say, right? But I would have just bought the presses, right, and stuck them in the basement of my house, all right, not paid $3,000 in rent for a 15 square foot store, all right. That's $3,000 in 1989 money, right?
Yeah.
That's a lot, right? On Halsey Street in Newark, I would just taken those presses and ran envelopes all day and made tons of money with little or no overhead, all right, instead of doing what I did back then, right? So you live and learn, right? There's no guarantee to success, and that's where you have to manage your risk, right? So sustainability is important, because people talk about, okay, access to capital. We recognize that at the New Jersey Cannabis Regulatory Commission. That's one of our big discussions all the time, and one of our goals, right? Working with partners, to your point, the previous point, Jim. But the question becomes is, once you give that capital to an entrepreneur, all right, how does that person manage that, and how do they manage their risk? in order to sustain their business. That's going to be key. I mean, many people call, but few are chosen.
Yeah, no, that's a really, really important point. Thank you for clarifying that. And as a really good reminder. There's a bunch of questions. So before we get to questions, I want to ask each of you, what's one thing that you're really concerned about in this industry? Sam?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I'm glad you asked that, because what really has been key in my mind is the federal government. Cannabis is still illegal, right? I mean, so the way they treat cannabis in the IRS rules, 280E, 280 Echo, all right? And a lot of folks, see, the issue is a lot of folks and a lot of entrepreneurs don't notice, right? The way they treat it is you cannot deduct any business expense from your business. So you can't depreciate, you can't, as well as I do, if you're a businessman, you can deduct, all these business expenses.
Yeah.
So you can't do any of that stuff in the cannabis business, and that's key. That's important because at the end of the year, your balance sheet, you're gonna have all these expenses, and you're gonna have to pay Uncle Sam. And a lot of people get into trouble by not paying Uncle Sam. So that's important.
Yeah, I mean, it's what I've seen happen in this, and it's a fascinating, this whole 280E and the history of 280E and how it's showing up in the market. It's funny because it's operating expenses versus cost of goods sold, and so two big things that I find happening. One is that if you don't understand that, you get into the problem that Sam's talking about, right? Like you operate for a year, 2 years, and then some accountant comes in and say, oh my God, you owe, $1 million in tax, and it tanks businesses, right? Or puts them under such financial pressure that they just can't grow then for several years, and it just, it kind of guts the business. So not knowing this creates an imbalance, right? So those folks that are savvy, have access to resources, that are savvy, have the right kind of consult coming into it, know it, and they can set up and they can avoid that problem. So that's one issue. The other one is because you do actually have this game between cost of goods sold and operating expenses. If you're savvy and you know how to do this, and you've got good accounting, and you're operating your business correctly, you can minimize this to some extent. So there's like examples of you start charging delivery fees for delivering. Well, that you can deduct, but you can't deduct the actual the driving costs and things like that. So if you know how to make it work, you're not going to eliminate it, but you can minimize some of the effect. But you need to know these things. So for me, it comes back to this: we don't have a level playing field, right? So for those folks that know how to play it and know how to do this, I mean, even if you get a 1 or 2% advantage, particularly on the dispensing side, on the retail side, it hits this part of the market very severely because there's very little cost of goods sold that you can push back onto. But as a retailer, if you can get another 1%, 2% margin on your business, a couple of quarters, and you're going to have far more resources and capacity than the dispensary down the street. So now you've got this advantage, this financial structural advantage that you've created for no other reason than this kind of crazy IRS tax code issue, and you can game it just a little bit more. So it's a good example, I think, of why the playing field is not perfectly level, and why, if we can address this, 280 has a bunch of other things too, but just from a level playing field point of view, it would be a nice thing to do.
Yeah, and I think that has to be addressed on a federal issue, and I would tell people and encourage people to talk to their federal legislators to get this change if you're interested. I would encourage cannabis associations certainly to lobby their federal legislators to get this IRS rule change. And the reason being, it's an equal opportunity rule, right? So it affects the deep pocket folks, the multi-state operators, as well as the equity folks, the small entrepreneurs. But guess what? Who gets hurt worse, right? It's going to be the little guy that's going to get hurt worse, right? Because they have less resources, right? So you asked me my concern. That's a big concern for me, especially when it comes to equity.
Absolutely, 100%. So where are there opportunities for tech innovation in this industry? Bruce, you want to take it since you've probably seen things from other states?
Do you want to give me a time limit on this? Because I was like, what? I mean, look, I think in any industry that starts to evolve, you start to understand that, good business decisions are driven by data, right? So if you can have more understanding of really what's happening from a data point of view, not only inside your business, but inside your region, inside your market. I mean, the most interesting ones that I've seen, everything from, distribution companies who are now actually looking at a sort of a regional or a state level analysis of really what's happening, supply and demand, what's happening with product trends, things like that. Fascinating things there. I've seen things. One of my favorite actually podcast episodes are these guys that they were ex-military and law enforcement, and they were using imaging technology to find bunkers underground and meth labs in cities. They shrunk it down to be able to find mold spores on cannabis plants, right? So just the ability to take this technology and apply it to various problems in cannabis is somewhat unlimited. It's really just a question of what are the economics of making those technologies or pivoting them into cannabis, and where are we as a market? And honestly, this whole state by state thing is what crushes a lot of these things, because if I can't operate at a federal level, it makes it really difficult to develop solutions when I've got, essentially, 20 some different individual markets that all have different regulations and different factors. But yeah, I would say anything with data collection, anything to do with, making better business decisions is ripe opportunities for technology in cannabis.
Got it. Thanks.
And I agree with Bruce. It's about the data, right? I mean, if you can harness that data and analyze it and configure it to make a better sale, all right, or to adapt a particular product. The other thing, opportunities out there in communications, GPS. There's a bunch of stuff out there. 5G. Coming on board and making it quicker. And also, customer service. I think customer service is going to be key here. All right. So any kind of innovation that's going to deal with, servicing your customer better is going to be key here.
Yeah. I talked to one company that's doing vending machine, cannabis vending machine technology, right? So, full on ID check, everything you need to do, and you just I don't have to go to the dispensary. I don't have to sit there and wait in line for a bud tender, right? I just either I place my order and I pull it out of the machine, or I kind of go to the machine. I just dial in what I want, right? I mean, as we really evolve this,
that's the red box model, right? So you have you have the challenge here is where are you going to place the security and where are you going to place it, and then also regulations, right? Because you pull that model out, you take the red box model and it's going to come to the CRC and we're going to regulate, right?
Oh, absolutely. But honestly, I'd much rather regulate technology than try to regulate people. People are horrible to regulate, right? So a lot of the challenges we have in cannabis is the fact, we've had these bud tenders who, the level of education and understanding and variability is so great at that service level component of where people actually get their cannabis. It is in many respects, I think, the weak link in the chain that we have right now.
Yeah. So those great answers, great insights. Here's a question. I think, Sam, you should take it. Here it is. To what extent are municipalities the gatekeepers of licenses in New Jersey? If it is similar to MA or a host community agreement, local permission required before state licenses are approved, what guardrails are in place to prevent abuse of cannabis businesses at the municipal level?
Yeah, that's a mouthful there, Jimmy. Thank you very much for that question. All right. So look, it's local control, right? So you have some municipalities that they're establishing their own cannabis regulatory councils. All right. I'm not going to mention who they are, but they're establishing their own cannabis regulatory council. You also have municipalities that are, let's not hide it. The fact they have these high fees, and not only are they high, but they're annual fees. I mean, think about that. You got to pay $40,000. What liquor store has to pay $40,000 a year every year, all right, to operate, to sell liquor in a town, right? So, they're not, the CRC could keep our fees low. So this is something that, again, all right, we may have to do amendments in the legislature, you know?
Yeah.
I'm not going to speculate on it, but we may have to do that because, you know, honestly, you know, I'm looking at some of these fees and it's just not in keeping with the spirit of what I feel the law set out to do, right? Which is that equity piece, right? And the diversity piece. So, yeah, and Jim, you know as well as I do that, you know, every town they're always scrapping for dollars, right? They want to keep their property values down. Not their property values down, their property taxes down, right? And this is another way of doing that, right? They want to be able to contribute to the schools, right? And this is another pipeline for revenue, right? So
Absolutely.
you
And
know,
Bruce,
it's something that's we have to discuss, and it's got to be a serious discussion because if you really want equity, you know, you can't have, you know, like I said, a $40,000 licensing fee every year because, you know, it's not, by the way, it's not just the equity candidate, but it's also, you know, that's high for, you know, the standard person that's going, you know, so.
yeah, no, absolutely. Bruce, have you seen that in other states? Is that an issue?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's the thing that I get kind of interested or that I find fascinating about this process is as the fees go up, you run into this issue of continuing the illicit market, right? So I think some of the more interesting municipalities have, or more progressive or more kind of thoughtful municipalities have realized at some level that if we're really hard or really restrictive about cannabis in our area, depending on what the area is and what's happening around you, I'm going to maintain or continue to push the illegal market, right? And that's problematic. Right? There's all sorts of reasons why a municipality does not want to have a strong illegal cannabis market. The fact is it's there, right? And I think we need to, you know, to pretend it's not there just means you're not really looking at the problem holistically. And so I think the interesting municipalities have managed to, yes, take advantage, you know, create revenue opportunities for themselves, but also see it as like we need to establish a healthy legal cannabis market to really offset the cost that ultimately a municipality is going to have with an illegal market, right? So I think if they really look at the trade-off, they'll make much more kind of reasonable decisions around what are we going to do around licensing and costing some of these things.
Right.
And Jim, it gets back to what I said before. You know, you're gonna have that spectrum. You know, you're gonna have municipalities on one side of the spectrum, municipalities on the other side of the spectrum. And Bruce, to your point, you know, municipalities will use these high fees to also keep the market out of their locale. You know, or minimize the market in the locale. So that's another tool.
Yeah.
Got it. We have time for one last question, folks, and it's a interesting one, and I'd love to get your take on it. The cannabinoid market is only a slice of the cannabis market. Instead of pouring time, money, and talent into opening another adult use dispensary or funding another recreational product, why not pour time, money, and talent into product development in plastic, animal feed, energy production, construction materials, etc.? I have no idea. So, Bruce,
I
guess that's the hemp possibility.
Well, because that stuff is not sexy. That stuff is not sexy right now.
Well, it doesn't, and it doesn't pose the regulatory challenges, right? Like if you're gonna, you know, if you want to figure out a new way to decord hemp and create hempcrete and then some new kind of process and, you know, form factor, you just do it, right? Like it doesn't have the sort of restrictive covenants that you have with THC and cannabis. And I honestly feel that, you know, industrial hemp is, from a market point of view, vastly bigger than anything we would do in terms of, you know, human ingestion of cannabinoids, you know, either from hemp or THC or, you know, or marijuana. So, you know, there's existing markets, right? So there's existing processes for dealing with these things. And quite honestly, some of those markets are just huge and going to be very slow moving. Like replacing wood pulp with hemp, you know, for paper manufacturing, you know, it's going to take 30 years, right? Because we have to phase out, you know, significant infrastructure that's designed to work with wood pulp, right? So yes, I think we should continue to focus on those things, but the pace of change is so slow on that stuff we need to wait. We need to be patient. So yeah, I mean, I think we should. It's a different ball of wax.
Got it. Got it.
Agree.
So this has been a great conversation. Thank you so much. We usually end with a poem or a saying. Why don't we start with you, Sam? Go ahead.
A poem or a saying, huh? So I picked a poem, and last night I was thinking, and I wanted to call you, Jim. I said, what is this with the poem thing, man? So I like Walt Whitman, right? So, when I was a kid, they made us actually read Walt Whitman. And my favorite Walt Whitman poem is "I Hear America Sing," right? Because it talks to us about America, right? And the workmen in America, work women and workmen. So it goes like this, and I have it in front of me. I hear America singing the varied carols I hear, those of mechanics, each one singing his as it should be blithe and strong. The carpenter singing his as he measures his plank and beam. The mason singing his as he makes ready for work or leaves off work. The boatman singing what belongs to him in his boat. The deckhand singing on his steamboat deck. The shoemaker singing as he sits in his bench. The hatter singing as he stands. The woodcutter song. The plowboy on his way this morning or at noon, intermission or at sundown. The delicious singing of the mother or of the young wife at work or of the girl sewing or washing, each singing what belongs to him or her and to none else. The day, what belongs to the day. At night, the party of young fellows, robust, friendly, singing and open mouth their strong, melodious songs. I love it.
I like it.
Nice. Thank you for that, Sam. Bruce, go ahead.
Yeah, so I spend most of my time working with the companies on strategy and helping them figure out how they're going to approach these markets. Cannabis, is a super dynamic, high growth market, and the challenge is, quite honestly, is there are so many opportunities, right? There's so many things you could do in cannabis, and one of the big kind of failure modes, I think, for a lot of companies is they just get too distracted and they try to chase too many things. So I'm always using this phrase with companies is, we can climb any mountain you want, just not every mountain you want. So it's really about choosing, like, where do you want to focus? Where do you want to create value? How do you want to differentiate yourself in this market? And I think anyone listening to this that's kind of on that entrepreneur side or thinking about starting a business or has a cannabis business, like it's just so important to really choose, like, where are you going to focus? Because you have limited time, energy, resources. And if you don't focus, you're going to be spread too thin and you're not going to be successful in the market. So figure out what your mountain you're going to climb and then focus on climbing that mountain and don't get distracted by other ones.
Great way to end. Thanks, guys. Thanks for joining us. I hope you enjoyed the show. Please like it, leave a review, and subscribe. See you soon.